An Ideal Husband, Part 1. The story begins in the elegant drawing room of Sir Robert Chiltern's London house. The room is tastefully decorated, and guests are arriving for a party hosted by Sir Robert and his wife, Lady Gertrude Chiltern. The Chilterns are seen as the epitome of an ideal couple in London society, admired for their moral integrity and high standards. Lady Chiltern is talking with the charming and witty Mrs. Cheveley, a woman with a dubious past. Mrs. Cheveley is a friend from Lady Chiltern's youth, but her reputation is far from spotless. She has come back to London with a hidden agenda, which involves blackmailing Sir Robert. Sir Robert Chiltern, a respected politician and government official, is a confident and accomplished man, and his speech to the guests reflects his dedication to public service and high moral principles. It is clear that he is admired by his peers and respected by society. Mrs. Cheveley approaches Robert and tells him that she knows he betrayed the government. She knows that he once sold Baron Arnheim, her ex-lover, insider knowledge about the Suez Canal Company. Arnheim purchased numerous shares in the company before the government had a chance. Arnheim made lots of money from the shares, and so did Robert. The government made far less money than it expected. Robert wants to know why Mrs. Cheveley is bringing this up again. She tells him that she wants him to fund a fraudulent scheme in Argentina. If he doesn't fund the venture, she'll tell everyone what he did. He will lose his position in the House of Commons at Westminster, and he'll be barred from London social circles. At first, Robert refuses proudly, prompting Mrs. Cheveley to deliver a cynical speech about the hypocrisy of English morality. Sir Robert tries to dismiss her accusation, but Mrs. Cheveley has evidence: the letter he wrote offering the secrets. She says she'll give him the letter after he makes a public announcement supporting the Argentine Canal. Robert agrees to fund the venture because he doesn't know what else to do. Mrs. Cheveley tells Lady Chiltern about Robert's change of heart regarding the Argentine Canal, and triumphantly takes her leave. Lady Chiltern senses some sort of foul play, and asks Robert for an explanation. Lady Chiltern has made it clear to him that their marriage hangs in the balance if he does not do the right thing. Lord Goring, Robert's friend, warns him to stay away from Mrs. Cheveley. He explains to Robert that she's a devious woman who will always find new ways to blackmail him. If she is not stopped now, there's no telling what she'll demand next. Robert agrees to call the deal off because he knows that Lord Goring is right. The problem is finding the right way to tell Mrs. Cheveley the truth. Meanwhile, the young and naive Mabel Chiltern, Sir Robert's younger sister, is being courted by Lord Goring. They share a light-hearted and flirtatious conversation that adds an element of romantic comedy to the play. When Mabel Chiltern and Lord Goring are alone, Mabel finds a diamond brooch on the sofa. Lord Goring takes possession of it and asks Mabel not to say anything about it. An Ideal Husband, Part 2. The next morning, at the Chiltern residence, Lord Goring arrived. He is in love with Mabel Chiltern and determined to help his friend Sir Robert. Goring tells Robert that he should have been completely honest with his wife, but Robert explains that if she knew the whole truth, she would end their marriage. Lord Goring decides to talk to Lady Chiltern to try to alter her views on life and perfection. Lady Chiltern comes home while the men are conversing. She has been at a Women's Liberal Association meeting, where, as she says, they discuss things such as factory acts, female inspectors, the 8 Hours Bill, the parliamentary franchise, and so on. Soon, Lord Robert leaves, and Mabel Chiltern takes his place, asking Goring if he will meet her the next morning. Goring agrees and then leaves. After that, Mrs. Cheveley arrived at the Chiltern residence. Mrs. Cheveley is inquiring about a diamond brooch she lost the day before, asking whether it was found by anyone at the reception. Lord Goring found the brooch and still has it. Lady Chiltern and Mrs. Cheveley are able to speak to each other frankly. Lady Chiltern makes it clear that Mrs. Cheveley is not welcome in her house. Lady Chiltern is outraged and demands that Mrs. Cheveley leave her house at once. Just then, Robert walks in, and Mrs. Cheveley announces triumphantly that
Robert made his fortune by selling a government secret.
after observing the impact of her announcement with satisfaction, she leaves the house. Robert admits that Mrs. Cheveley spoke the truth, and Lady Chiltern cries out that all their life together has been a lie. She loved him because he was good, honest, and idealistic, and now her love has been crushed. He is no longer her ideal husband. An Ideal Husband, Part 3. The third act opens onto Lord Goring's library, where the impressively inscrutable butler named Phipps is tidying up some newspapers. Lord Goring walks in, and Phipps hands Goring 3 letters and leaves the room. One letter is written on pink paper. It is a message from Lady Chiltern that reads,
I want you. I trust you. I am coming to you.
She intends to arrive at 10 that evening. Goring decides to cancel his previous evening plans and decides to have a conversation with Lady Chiltern when she arrives in the evening. He will ask her to forgive Robert, since every woman should stand by her husband. Just then, Lord Caversham enters. For Lord Goring, it is a very inconvenient time. Lord Caversham intends to have a serious talk with his son. He wants him to get married. Lord Goring suggests that they should move into the smoking room, which is less drafty. His father walks into the room. Lord Goring takes Phipps aside and tells him that a lady is coming to visit him this evening and instructs him to take her into the drawing room when she arrives. The bell rings, but Lord Goring must rush off to join his father. Soon Mrs. Cheveley walks into the library, radiant and splendidly dressed. She was surprised to hear from Phipps that Lord Goring was expecting her, and then assumes that he was expecting another woman, a secret lover, perhaps. She glances at the table and recognizes Lady Chiltern's handwriting. She reads the pink letter and takes it as proof that Lady Chiltern and Lord Goring are having an affair. Phipps comes in from the drawing room, and she hides the letter under a book on the table. Suddenly, Lord Goring and Lord Caversham walk back into the library, and Mrs. Cheveley hides in the drawing room. Father and son are still discussing marriage. After that, Father left and went outside. Just then, Sir Robert walks in. He tells Goring despairingly that Mrs. Cheveley has revealed his shameful secret to his wife. Lord Goring takes Phipps aside and tells him that he must change his instructions regarding the lady visitor. When she comes, Phipps must turn her away. Phipps replies that the lady is already here, waiting in the drawing room. In some confusion, Lord Goring returns to Sir Robert, who begs him for advice. Lord Goring assures Robert that she will forgive him. Sir Robert hears a sound in the room and insists on investigating. He reveals Mrs. Cheveley and storms away, angry. He leaves the house in disgust. Lord Goring is completely surprised when he realizes Mrs. Cheveley was in the drawing room rather than Lady Chiltern. They begin talking, and Mrs. Cheveley tries to convince Lord Goring to marry her by offering to give him Sir Robert's letter in return. He refuses the offer and tells her she has desecrated the idea of love, and for that she is beyond forgiveness. Lord Goring shows Mrs. Cheveley the brooch he found at the Chiltern party. Mrs. Cheveley explains that it is hers and that she misplaced it. Knowing the origin of the brooch, Lord Goring accuses her of stealing it from her cousin, Lady Berkshire, whom he gave it to. She denies the theft, but the brooch is in fact a bracelet with a hidden clasp, and after Lord Goring clamps it onto her arm, Mrs. Cheveley cannot remove it. Lord Goring threatens to call the police if Mrs. Cheveley does not give him Sir Robert's incriminating letter. Beaten in her own game, Mrs. Cheveley hands over the letter, but before angrily leaving his house, she secretly steals Lady Chiltern's urgent letter when Lord Goring is not looking. An Ideal Husband, Part 4. Lord Caversham informs Lord Goring of Sir Robert's speech about not funding the Argentine Canal scheme. All the papers are praising Sir Robert. Shortly thereafter, Lord Goring proposes to Mabel Chiltern, and she accepts him. Lady Chiltern walks into the room, and Mabel leaves them to speak in private. Lord Goring tells Lady Chiltern that Mrs. Cheveley gave him the incriminating letter and that he has burned it. He also admits that Mrs. Cheveley stole the pink letter from his drawing room and now plans to mail it to Robert as proof of infidelity. Robert walks in with the pink letter in his hands. Because the letter is not addressed, he assumes it is meant for him. He is overjoyed by his wife's expression of love and trust, and she decides not to correct him. Lord Goring discreetly leaves the room. Robert tells Lady Chiltern that he no longer fears public disgrace because he has her love. She happily informs him that Mrs. Cheveley gave his incriminating letter to Lord Goring. Robert is safe. He is overwhelmed by relief. Sir Robert suggests that he should retire from public life. Robert comes in, carrying his letter of resignation. Lady Chiltern reads it and rips it up. Using Lord Goring's own words, she tells Robert that she does not want him to sacrifice his career and that it is her duty as a woman to forgive him. That is how women help the world. Robert thanks Goring for all he's done. In return, Goring asks Robert for his sister Mabel's hand in marriage. At first, Robert does not grant it, thinking that Goring is in love with Mrs. Cheveley. But Lady Chiltern explains the whole misunderstanding. Goring was waiting for her, and not Mrs. Cheveley, the previous night, and Robert happily gives his blessing. Lord Caversham and Mabel Chiltern enter the room. Lord Caversham is shocked and delighted by the news of the engagement and also by Robert's change of heart about the cabinet seat. He threatens to cut Goring off if he is not an ideal husband to Mabel, but Mabel interjects to say that she would not like such a husband. She would rather be a real wife. Everyone goes in for lunch except Sir Robert, who stays behind to think. A few minutes later, Lady Chiltern comes looking for him. They promise to love one another and to hold love above all.